All right, we are back here with Grant Cohn, the third, maybe fourth time returnee of the fullback dive. Officially takes the title from Ryan Hannibal, now our most long recurring guest, which is fantastic. Yeah, celebrate over there. Columnist for the Santa Rosa Press Democrat, covers the 49ers. He's been doing that since 2011, and we just keep having him back because we love the bold, scorching takes here at the fullback dive, and our guy Cohen always lets them rip, and many of them have benefited our fantasy owners. So, Grant, how you doing? Thanks for coming back on.
I'm doing all right. I'm ready to bring the scorching hot takes for you today, man. Let's do this.
Love it, love it, love it. So we'll get right in there. And last year, one of your semi-scorching takes was that the 49ers were going to underwhelm. Everybody was all about them. They were the darling of the NFL. And you predicted a 7-9 season, and that was even before Jimmy Garoppolo goes down. And then the wheels fall completely off after week 3. So impressive take there. But Jimmy G obviously was a huge reason for their lack of success, or his lack of presence there. What's the latest on him, his recovery, and what are we expecting out of him in 2019?
What's the latest out of him? Well, we talked to him a couple of weeks ago, and he said he's ahead of schedule. Good. Just like every athlete ever has said about their recovery from an ACL surgery. So the question is he actually going to participate in team drills and in training camp? And we'll see.
Right.
The expectation is he's going to be ready for week 1. If he plays 16 games, I would expect his numbers would be somewhere around 4,000 yards, 25 touchdowns, and 16 picks. Mm-hmm. He's thrown a lot of picks with the Niners. His TD to INT ratio hasn't been great, but he's thrown for a lot of yards. Nick Mullins threw for a lot of yards. I mean, their production in this scheme has been pretty similar. You can look at what Nick Mullins did in 8 games last year and pretty much prorate that out of over 16 games, maybe give Jimmy Garoppolo a little bit of a bump, but I expect at the end of the season his quarterback rating will be around 93, 94. Mm-hmm. But really the issue with Garoppolo from a fantasy perspective, if you're thinking about investing in Garoppolo, the issue isn't necessarily his picks or his yards, it's his durability. Mm-hmm. You want a guy who's going to give you 16 games, 16 weeks. Russell Wilson's never missed a game in his life. Garoppolo's only played 10 games. He's 27. He started 2 games for the Patriots, separated his shoulder, started 8 games for the 49ers, tore his ACL. So the burden is on him to show that he can last a full season. And if you're drafting him high, you're betting on him on these injuries just being flukes. If you pass on him, you're saying this guy might not have the body type, the durability to last in the NFL. He's, after all, an Eastern Illinois guy. He was never really tested in college.
Yeah, and at a position so just deep in talent right now, quarterback fantasy-wise, it just he's not too high on my radar. I mean, the floor you illustrated is very low with those injury concerns. And then the ceiling, is it even that great? Like your projection, 4,000 yards and 25, 30 TDs. You can find that pretty much anywhere in fantasy these days. So I'm personally not on the Jimmy G train, and you illustrated a lot of the reasons why. But one reason people might get excited about him, and on the plus side, is they've added a lot of weaponry this draft. Who knows exactly how it will fit in? That's what I'm interested to hear your take on. We got South Carolina's Deebo Samuel coming with the 36th pick, and then right after in the 3rd round, they go Baylor's Jalen Hurd at 67. What do you think these rookies are going to bring to the table, and how do you think they're going to be used with Kyle Shanahan here?
Yeah, that's a great question. On the one hand, Kyle Shanahan handpicked these players, and his pride these guys on the field and give them targets and opportunities to justify his selection of them. On the other hand, he knows that his scheme is one of the most complex schemes in the NFL and most difficult to learn. There's the longest learning curve. It takes people a long time to get it down. He already has people on his wide receivers on his team that have been in the system 2-3 years. They're way ahead of the curve. Last year, Shanahan drafted Dante Pettis around the same spot he drafted Deebo Samuel, and Pettis didn't start right away. Pettis wasn't ready to start right away. We talked to him in the locker room. He would say, there's just so much thinking I have to do from the huddle to going out to my position. I'm thinking, what route am I running? What position am I playing? It took him until week 11 where he was really comfortable enough to start. So with Deebo, what I'm expecting early is he'll be the punt returner, the kick returner, and then he'll compete with Marquise Goodwin probably to be the number 3 receiver. I think Goodwin will probably be like the Taylor Gabriel type, the number 3 guy who comes in the middle of the field. And then early on, Deebo will probably be the slot receiver who comes in, or an outside receiver who comes in the red zone maybe, and or 3rd down. He'll compete with Trent Taylor for those opportunities. I think Deebo will probably get his opportunity to start more toward the back end of the schedule, just like Pettis last year. I think Kendrick Bourne probably will be given the first opportunity to start at flanker just because he's a 3-year pro. He's been in the system. He knows he knows the scheme inside and out. He has the experience advantage over Deebo. I think he'll probably start early. He's not that great. So as the season progresses, I think Deebo will take that job. So he's an interesting player to draft in fantasy because he probably won't give you much early outside of special teams and jet sweeps and maybe an occasional reverse or screen. But by the end of the season, he could be getting a lot of opportunities in an offense that passes a lot. And the other guy, Jalen Hurd, to me, he seems like more of a project. I don't know if there's a role for him. For Deebo, he slides into that Pierre Garçon role eventually. He could be a slot receiver, punt returner, kick returner early. For Jalen Hurd, he's kind of like a project. Let's see what he can do and then figure it out along the way. They said he's a wide receiver kind of. I think he's probably not going to be a fantasy football option as a rookie. But for the 49ers, I think the way they probably would use him if he's even active on game days would be probably in the red zone again. Remember, he's 6'5", 230 pounds. He played running back for 3 years in the SEC. They might use him as a goal line back, considering all of their running backs are 200 pounds. This guy's 230. Or they could split him out like a Rob Gronkowski tight end type in the red zone and throw jump balls to him. So maybe they'll see him as a gadget player who can improve their 32nd ranked red zone offense. Or maybe they see him as a long-term project, but probably not someone you would draft in a fantasy league.
Absolutely. It's good stuff to know. I think Deebo Samuel is already getting a ton of hype in fantasy, and it's important that you noted the steep learning curve, and it might take him a while to get going. A lot of people are just saying lack of targets, and then Deebo Samuel, clearly they wanted him. He's going to step in and be the wide receiver one, and it's pretty clear, at least in your opinion, that he's going to have to learn a bit beforehand, and I think that's smart. We saw it with some of those other guys you mentioned. And the one that I'm most intrigued who you mentioned is Dante Pettis. I think early in the offseason, Shanahan says this is our best receiver. He can play all three positions, and it was a steep learning curve. He was injured for a lot of the season as well, but we saw that brief flash where we had that 4 weeks of just dominant performances almost. 17 catches, 338 yards, 4 TDs, and his only 4 healthy weeks as the 5th most fantasy points for wide receivers in that span. So I liked a lot about him. They obviously didn't feel comfortable enough to avoid wide receiver, though. So what do you think? Is he going to be the top guy here? How do you see it all shaking out? Is he still in line for that breakout a lot of people were projecting him for?
Well, the thing I want to highlight that you said is that Kyle Shanahan said he's his top wide receiver. So that's all you need to know. Mm-hmm. This is Shanahan's offense. He's going to feature who he wants to feature. In his estimation, Pettis is his best guy. Now, clearly Kittle is his best guy.
Yeah.
So that means Pettis is number 2. Those are basically going to be 1A and 1B in the passing game, and everyone else is going to fight for what's left of the targets. I think Pettis, if he stays healthy for 16 games, I have written down here 50 catches, 850 yards. I don't know how many touchdowns he would get. He did get a lot of touchdowns, and he had a high touchdown rate last year. I don't know if that would carry over this year, but I'm thinking roughly 50 catches, 80 targets, 850 yards. A number 2 receiver. But again, when you are investing in Dante Pettis, much like Jimmy Garoppolo, the question is durability. I mean, to me on the field last year, every time he got the ball, I was like, oh my God, like he's going to get hurt. He looks small. He doesn't have that NFL musculature that someone like Christian Kirk, who's about the same size, you can see it. I mean, he looks like he can take a hit. Dante Pettis looked like, oh my God, I hope he gets up. And there were 3 or 4 times in the season where he didn't really get up very quickly, and he had injuries the whole year. I think Shanahan is sort of comparing him to Kittle, because Kittle had a lot of injury issues his rookie year too, and had nice moments, and then just exploded his second year, had a totally different body, and made a huge leap. Coaches a lot of times talk about players making their biggest leap between years 1 and year 2. I think Shanahan is hoping/expecting Pettis to make a similar leap that Kittle made. I don't necessarily expect it as much unless Pettis has a totally different body. But again, 50 catches, 850 yards. If that helps your fantasy team, I think that's what you could get if you get 16 games from him, and that's not a guarantee.
Yes, absolutely. And speaking of injury-prone, Marquise Goodwin, a guy that a lot of people were taking in round 5 or so in fantasy last year. That chemistry with Jimmy G was undeniable in their first few games together, but then Jimmy couldn't stay healthy, then Goodwin couldn't stay healthy. Is there any chance of a rebound here? Is he kind of on the outs now that they've added all these rookies?
Well, at the end of the season, Shanahan made it real clear that in the plan for this season is to use Goodwin more judiciously, more sparingly, that he provides value to the offense, but he's not durable enough to be a starter. And the more you play him, the more frequently he breaks down and the less often you have him. So the idea is if you back him off, use him like half of the snaps instead of 3/4 of the snaps, maybe you get more games out of him. So I think the idea is instead of having him be the starting split end, the starting X receiver, have him be the number 3 receiver in a lot of situations, like the Taylor Gabriel role in Atlanta 3 years ago with when Kyle Shanahan was there, when Julio Jones was a split end. Sanu was the flanker, and he would move into the slot, and Taylor Gabriel would be the number 3 guy on the outside. I think that's how they could use Goodwin a lot. But the issue with that number 3 receiver is I think it'll be like situationally dependent. Like in the middle of the field, if it's 2nd and 10 and they want to use 3 receivers, they'll bring in Goodwin to have a deep threat. But if it's 3rd and 3, they might rather have Deebo or Trent Taylor on the field. Or if it's the red zone, you may not see Goodwin at all. So I think he's probably going to be below 40 catches. He might be in the more like the 30 range, and he's going to be fighting for targets with Kendrick Bourne, Trent Taylor, and the running backs.
Who do you see as that Julio? I mean, obviously they don't have a Julio type of player. Is that Pettis? So is he that? It's Kittle. Okay. Kittle. We're going to get to him in a second.
If you compare like the yards and the targets and the catches for Julio Jones in 2016 and Kittle last year, they're pretty similar. Now, obviously, he's not Julio Jones, but in terms of the emphasis in the passing game and like the usage, to use a basketball term, it's certainly Kittle.
Absolutely. I mean, he just had. We'll skip the running backs for a second and just stay with the passing game.
Sure.
88 catches, 1,337 yards, an NFL record for a tight end, 5 TDs as a sophomore for Kittle. He's going to be the first 49er drafted, and rightfully so. He's earned that. And at a tight end position that's been so hit or miss outside of that, Kittle and Kelsey and Zach Ertz, outside of them, there's really was nobody you could depend on week to week. But Kittle was unbelievable, one of the fantasy steals of the draft. Is there any reason to expect him to improve? Could he regress now that teams are more aware of him? What do you expect from Kittle as his third season here?
Okay, reasons he could improve. He only caught 5 touchdown passes last year. And the year before that, he had 2. He hasn't been established as a weapon in the red zone yet. They don't really trust him to make contested catches. They like to use him as like a run-after-the-catch guy, which is so unique for a tight end. And he's great at it, as we've seen. So if they can find new ways to get him the ball in the red zone, he could actually double his touchdown output. And you figure even though he's not good at making contested catches, there ought to be other ways you can get him the ball in the red zone because he's so talented.
He's a big boy too, right? Like, isn't he like 6? He's a pretty big boy too, right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, he's not like a go up and get it guy like Eric Ebron or even Zach Ertz, but there are ways to get him the ball in the red zone beyond just like a screen. Like they can be more creative with that, or a deep crossing route, which they tried with him last year. So I think there will be more creativity with how they use him. The downside with Kittle is, if you remember back to his rookie year, he was hurt the whole time. He's not the biggest tight end. In fact, you'd probably call him undersized. He's about 250 pounds, but he plays like he's 270. He's very physical in the run game. He takes a lot of hits. So will the injuries come back? It's the same issue with every player on the 49ers. I feel like I'm repeating myself. But more specifically to the tight end position, we saw it with Gronkowski. When he started to take over the league, like, defensive players like almost targeted him. He got hit really hard in some very compromised positions and some painful places. He was hurt a lot in his career. And a tight end running down the middle of the field, it's a very big target. Defensive backs go low. They take out knees. I mean, I'm not predicting that George Kittle's going to get a horrific injury, but I do believe clearly, as you pointed out, he's going to be much more of a focus of defensive game planning, and I feel like he's going to get he may get some serious hits this year, which is part of the territory as being a tight end. So yeah, definitely one of the top 5 tight ends you would want to draft in fantasy football, but always got to keep in mind that he was basically injured his entire rookie year, and he's only had 2 years in the league.
Absolutely. Do you expect him to make that positive regression for TDs? I saw you had an awesome Twitter post where you did all the different ways they could use him. Do you think the coaching staff is drawing that stuff up? What do you expect from him?
I'd like to think they are, but then you go back and look at Julio Jones under Kyle Shanahan, and he kind of had the same issue. Mm-hmm. Like, I was looking at 2016, he had 1,400 yards and only 6 touchdowns. Yep. And I mean, that's nothing against Julio Jones. I think it shows a philosophy that Kyle Shanahan would, rather than figure out ways to get the ball to his best player in close quarters, he would rather use that player as a decoy and try to get the ball to other people who have one-on-one options. And maybe there's logic behind that rationale. But Shanahan has struggled in the red zone his entire career. I mean, he's been an OC 11 years, and I think he's ranked. No, I know he's ranked bottom half in the league in red zone efficiency 8 of those years. Oof. So he should. I mean, if he's being honest with himself, he would need to do some serious self-scouting on the plays he's calling, the concepts he's calling, and how he's featuring George Kittle. But he's very sure of himself, to put it mildly, Kyle Shanahan, and I think he's probably going to keep doing what he's been doing and spread the ball around in the red zone. Maybe use guys like Deebo, Jalen, Hurd, even Dante Pettis, who are getting more one-on-one matchups down there.
Absolutely. And let's turn to the run game, where Shanahan has been a very proven productor of that zone blocking scheme. We've had some fantasy running back monsters in the past, but we've also had some frustrating committees, and right now this looks almost impossible to project. We got Tevin Coleman joining this team in free agency. He brings Mostert back, and he even goes out and says we could have 4 active backs every game this year. So, I mean, you never know what's going to happen with Shanahan. Breida last year, he led the league in rushing for a few weeks there. But then he goes and gets Coleman. Jerick McKinnon's coming back. How do you think this work is going to be distributed between all these guys? Is there going to ever be anyone reliable, or what's your view of this backfield? Yeah,
this is kind of like it's a tough one from a fantasy football perspective. Which one do you? It's a crapshoot, really, because this is how it's gonna. This is the thinking, and this is how it's gonna play out. Breida's terrific, but he got hurt instantly last year. He's not durable. He's small. You can't count on him, and you really shouldn't be giving him more than 10 carries a game. McKinnon, coming off a torn ACL, you shouldn't be counting on him to have more than 10 carries a game. And then Tevin Coleman has never averaged more than 10 carries a game in his career. That's pretty much what he gives you. Also, he'll give you a couple of catches a game, too. So I think the idea is to have those 3 split carries, all 3, to preserve each one of them, because 2 of them, McKinnon and Breida, have had injury issues. And the other one, Coleman, I mean, you're signing him. I would imagine you're not signing him to drastically increase his workload. I think they like the role he played in Atlanta, and they'd like him to replicate that here. That being said, I mean, a 3-pronged committee, and Shanahan did this in 2014 when he was with Cleveland. He had Ben Tate, Terrence West, and Isaiah Crowell, and they all pretty much split carries. So that's not good news from a fantasy football perspective, but what could and probably will happen is, since these guys are so small, these running backs, and injury prone as they've proven in the past, if and when one of them goes down, then the other 2 are going to get more carries. I mean, as the season goes on, one will sort of become the bell cow by default, because he's the last guy standing.
Right.
So what you could do is you could draft Matt Breida in like the very end, and by week 8, you could have one of the best running backs in the league. But it's kind of like taking a long shot bet, but it could pay off, so why not?
Absolutely, yeah. Great stash and see approach, and they all go pretty cheap because everyone recognizes this is crowded. It's going to be a mess, but you're right. The injury concerns with so many of them.
Real quick, on the running backs, they're going to be involved heavily in the passing game. I wouldn't be surprised if Coleman gets 40 targets and McKinnon gets 40 targets. Both of those guys combining to get 80 to 90 targets, and I think the result of that will be fewer targets for Kyle Juszczyk, who is their fullback offensive weapon the last couple of years. He's not that fast. He's not that dynamic or dangerous for a weapon. I think they're going to try to get the ball into the running back's hands the way that they did in Atlanta with Devontae Freeman and Tevin Coleman in the passing game.
What do you think about the goal line? Do you have any guesses as to who might get those valuable touchdowns?
That's a great question because really it's not what Breida should be doing. He's not a goal line back. It's certainly not what McKinnon should be doing. So I think the guy who'll get the first opportunity is Tevin Coleman, who's about, 210 pounds? 205?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think he'll get a shot. And if he struggles, then Jalen Hurd comes into the picture because he was a running back in the SEC and he does weigh about 230 pounds. Now, he's a wide receiver. They gave him a wide receiver number, and he had serious issues with concussions in the SEC, which is why he transferred out. He left the conference, went to the Big 12 where they don't really play defense, and became a wide receiver. So I don't know if he even wants to play running back. Shanahan said he's going to play him at running back in his post-draft press conference, so I think that would be something they would tinker around with midway through the season if they're having trouble with Coleman.
Absolutely, yeah. So a nightmare to project early on, but if you get the guy that is the last man standing, whoever that might be, by week 8, and that's how the running back position always is in fantasy. Yeah, you got your Zekes and your Gurleys, but if you get a couple of those, your flex, you end up finding that right guy at the right time. It could propel you to the titles. So exactly, we've seen Breida have 150-yard 2 TD days. Maybe it's going to be him come week 8. Maybe it's Coleman. Who knows who it will be? But I'll still be drafting
real quick. Yeah, when they're all healthy. You could say, who's their best running back? Week 1, who should be on the field on 1st and 10?
Right.
Well, Breida averaged like 6.2 yards per carry on 1st and 10 last year. He's the cheapest of them, and it'd probably be the easiest guy to stash on the bench. But how do you keep him off the field when you're getting that kind of production on 1st and 10? I mean, he doesn't give you the same type of receiving threat out of the backfield, but just running the ball. I mean, I'll take 6 yards.
Yeah, absolutely. He was awesome to watch when he was healthy. I mean, it seemed like every other week he was dying on the NFL field, and like you thought you'd never see him again. And then he's back in the next week. You're like, what is going on here? But when he's healthy and when he's right, I loved watching Breida play. So he's kind of the guy. He goes the cheapest now too. Everyone likes the fact that McKinnon's returning, and everyone loved him before he got hurt last year. And then Coleman's the flashy new guy. So Breida kind of is that third man out. But I wouldn't be shocked at all.
He might be the best running back in the entire team. So definitely that's a good guy to get late.
Absolutely. So this one might seem a little bit random, but I just don't know much about this guy, and that's the 49ers ex-QB coach, and now he's the Broncos offensive coordinator. I think it's pronounced Rich Scangarello. Did I say that right? Scangarello?
I think it's Scangarello. I think it's a hard G, but either way, Scangarello.
Whoever he is, I mean, Mullins had some solid production. You know, is this a guy that is going to bring some interesting flair to the Broncos? Is it going to be a Shanahan-style offense over there? What do you think the Broncos fans could expect from this guy?
Yeah, well, if you saw – Broncos fans know this, but Fangio was originally considering Gary Kubiak, even interviewed Gary Kubiak, and decided, I don't want Gary Kubiak. And I think the reason was he felt Gary Kubiak was a little bit too stuck in his ways and unwilling to evolve and adapt with the trends that have been going around the league recently. So I think the reason he went and got Scangarello is Scangarello runs the same basic template of offense that Gary Kubiak runs. Gary Kubiak was the mentor for Kyle Shanahan. Shanahan was Kubiak's offensive coordinator with the Texans in 08, 09. So Scangarello was mentored by Shanahan. It's like, you know, a direct line. So it's going to be the same style of offense, but what's going to be different about it is, like Shanahan does, Scangarello is going to integrate the jet sweep, the RPO, all those new trendy things that Gary Kubiak probably wouldn't. That he hasn't kept up to date with. Scangarello has, and Fangio would be interested in those things because he's coming from Chicago with what's the head coach's name over there? He's the Anthony Reid.
Nagy, Matt Nagy.
And that's a total RPO system. Combined with Fangio's defense, that team had a lot of success last year. It makes sense for Fangio to want to bring some of those concepts with him to Denver. He's seen firsthand how effective they can be. So I think that's why Scangarello was appealed to him.
Absolutely. So wrap this thing up here. The 49ers entering last season, they were one of the buzziest teams. You were a little bit down on them, but now we got Jimmy G coming back. Some interesting defensive moves in free agency. Boast at the top. Do you see them turning this thing around? What's your season prediction for these guys?
I don't see them turning this thing around. I'm fading the 49ers, and I don't really feel any differently about them than I did last year. I still don't believe in Kyle Shanahan or Jimmy Garoppolo Last year I predicted 7 wins, and I'm not saying the team has gotten worse, but I'm predicting 6 wins this year. I think the schedule is just brutal. Like, they have 4 games in the Eastern time zone, and they haven't won a game in the Eastern time zone since 2014. They were 0-8 on the road last year. Almost every starter on the team has a serious injury history. I think this is a team that most of the country and even most of the Bay Area is constantly expecting them to be on the cusp. And like every year it's the same story. Like, hey, they're about to be good. They're about to be good. And they're not, and they never really live up to expectations. They already have the Rams in their division. That's 2 losses right there. They have the Seahawks. That's at least 1 loss. They're not going to win in Seattle. And Arizona, you think that's a terrible team, but the Niners haven't beaten them since 2014, and they lost to them twice last year. And now with Kyler Murray and this air raid offense, that's going to be a surprising team. I see the over-under for them is 5 wins. I wouldn't be surprised if they beat that and ended up with more like 6 or 7. And it's possible the Niners could even finish last in the NFC West. I think Kyler Murray has more upside right now than Jimmy Garoppolo, and I wouldn't be surprised if Kyler Murray had a better season than Jimmy Garoppolo did. I mean, it all comes down to Jimmy Garoppolo, right? And to Kyle Shanahan to an extent as well. The question with Jimmy Garoppolo is to use a cliche, is he a football player? We see the tools, right? He's the right height. He has good footwork. He has a strong arm. He's accurate. He has a quick release. I would compare him to like Marcus Mariota. Mariota has all the tools. It looks right. But he just doesn't play enough. Yeah. There's some type of disconnect. And you see a guy like Nick Mullins behind Jimmy Garoppolo. Like Nick Mullins has no tools. But he's a football player. He got hit a lot. He got up every time. Yeah. Is Garoppolo going to be the kind of guy who's always nursing something? If so, it's nothing against him. It's just very few people have the body to stand up to the NFL, collisions and violence, and maybe he's not one of them. I don't know. Until he shows me he can play 16 games, I'm betting against this team.
I totally fair. I love that. Is he a football player? You know, if you've played the sport, you know how physical it can be on the body. And there are those guys that just seem to be able to play every single down no matter what. And there's the guys that, to pull themselves out in the nagging little hamstring or whatever it might be. So I totally get that. Let's say, I know that was supposed to be the last question, but let's say he does play 16 and they still finish towards the bottom, if not the bottom team in that division. Is Shanahan on the hot seat, or is he? It seems like there's this whole reputation around this guy, whether it's deserved or not, that he's the next bright young genius. But is he truly that good? Like, could he be on the hot seat this year?
Well, I think it's possible that Garoppolo does play 16 games and the Niners still wins only 6 games, because the way the roster is constructed, he's making so much money. It's not really a complete team. They still have holes. Yeah. Like, they're not like the Rams, who are paying their quarterback very little and just have like a stacked team everywhere. Right. Like, no needs. The Niners have very young receivers who have proven very little. And they have a defensive backfield that's probably the worst in the league. They gave up 35 touchdown catches, only intercepted 2 passes, were last in the league in pass breakups. All they did to improve it was bring in Jason Verrett, who hasn't played in 3 years, really, and may not play at all. So now they're going to be facing a team like the Cardinals twice a year that's running an air raid offense. It's going to go 4 wide, 5 wide, 4 verticals down the field. They're going to try to target the Niners safeties deep, get those guys isolated one-on-one against guys like Christian Kirk and Andy Isabella. It's going to be bad if the Niners play zone coverage. They're going to have safeties covering those guys. If they play man coverage, then Kyler Murray's going to run all over them. I mean, I think the Niners' defensive backfield is really going to hold them back this year. It's going to hold back the team. And I think, so you're asking me, is Kyle Shanahan going to be on the hot seat? Well, he should be. If he can't get a 500 record into his 3rd year, that's not good, especially if you look around the league. Most teams, if they're on the right track, they start showing real progress by year 2. I mean, we're expecting that from the Browns. We saw it from the Bears last year. The turnarounds happen fast. The Niners have been sort of stuck in neutral. So if they go 6-10 this year, would Kyle Shanahan get fired? I doubt it. It would make Jed York look stupid. He's done so much firing recently, and I don't think he wants to make himself look incompetent again. So what he could do, and there was a report that just came out yesterday, which sort of indicates that this would be the direction the Niners would go. John Lynch would be the guy on the hot seat. If you fire Kyle Shanahan, there's probably 100% chance that he would get another job in the league, either as an offensive coordinator or as a head coach, because he has first of all, he had a good reputation as an offensive coordinator. Organizations could say, you know what, he wasn't a head coach, but let's bring him back and let him do the job he was born to do. Or they could say, you know, everyone fails in San Francisco. Let's give him a shot here.
Yeah.
So it's dangerous to fire him. If you fire John Lynch, he hasn't really done anything as a general manager. I don't think any team would be like, oh, that's a guy we have to get either as a GM or as a scout. You know, I think he'd have to at best go back to being a broadcaster or just retire. So it's way easier to just say, you know, we hired a GM who wasn't a GM. It's time to give Kyle Shanahan a real personnel man, and then see what Kyle Shanahan can do when he's only coaching players and not also in charge of scouting them and evaluating talent as well. I think that's probably where this is headed.
Absolutely. Alrighty, man. Well, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it. It's another fantastic interview filled with the scorching takes we love from you. Very realistic perspective of the 49ers, which we like. A lot of beat writers, we have them on, and they'll blow up smoke up their team's ass until the cows come home. And you're really realistic about the injury concerns and everything that's not right with the 49ers right now. So we appreciate that perspective and those takes, my man.
Well, I hope they were scorching enough for you. Thanks for having me on.
Always a good time, brother. Thanks for catching up.
Of course.